Okay, so everyone is talking about Hamas, but what is it and what does it really want? To answer that question, we spoke with someone who actually knows what they're talking about.
My name is Tariq Bakoni. I'm a writer. I'm the author of Hamas Contained: The Rise and Pacification of Palestinian Resistance.
So to understand where Hamas came from and what it wants, we have to understand what happened to the Palestinians. Between 1947 and 1949, 750,000 Palestinians, that's 3/4 of the population by the way, were forced out of their homes during the creation of the State of Israel. To ensure Israel had a Jewish majority, they were never allowed to return home. And in 1967, Israel conquered the remaining parts of what had been historic Palestine. Hamas was founded here in December 1987. That was also the first month of the first Palestinian uprising, known as the Intifada, against Israel's occupation.
Hamas as a movement is a nationalist movement first and foremost. So it's a movement that is committed to the liberation of Palestine from Israeli colonization.
Hamas is not the only Palestinian group that fights Israel, but it is the biggest. Its main rival, Fatah, gave up confronting Israel to run the Palestinian Authority instead, which has limited rule in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Because Hamas has an Islamic identity and Israel proclaims itself a Jewish state, a lot of Western coverage of the group describes its motivations as anti-Semitic. Tariq says that's not accurate.
It has not employed tactics that are grounded in anti-Semitism or that necessarily fight against Israeli Jews because of their Judaism, but rather to target the regime itself. So when we think about Hamas discussing the liberation of Palestine, what it means for the movement is dismantling a system of colonial violence.
Hamas has used and supported various tactics in that fight, both violent and non-violent. It has attacked both Israeli civilians and Israeli military targets. But you have to remember, it's not just an armed group.
The movement has a very sophisticated political infrastructure. So they have engaged with questions around governance and around movement building and around developing a welfare state that suggests that the movement is really looking to develop a Palestinian state within the land of historic Palestine.
In 2005, after years of attacks by Hamas and other groups, Israel dismantled the illegal settlements in the Gaza Strip and removed the settlers and soldiers who were there. A year later, Hamas won the Palestinian legislative elections, which were held in Gaza and the West Bank. And Israel, the US, and their allies responded to that by cutting off all aid and contact with the Palestinians and tried to organize a coup. The coup attempt failed, leaving Hamas in control of Gaza, but Gaza and the 2.2 million people who live there have been under a suffocating blockade ever since.
The punitive measure was focused in this case on the Palestinians in Gaza and to try to force them to bring down Hamas as a governing authority. But that didn't work, and instead the blockade evolved into a way for the Israeli authorities to contain Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
Watch part 2 to find out how the blockade impacted Gaza and what that meant for Hamas once it was in power.